Hi everyone, my name is Andrea DeLucia, and I actually have 4 children. 3 go to Medway schools. I have one in the middle school, a freshman in high school, an 8-year-old, and my son who goes to Catholic Memorial in West Roxbury. So I am a mindset and trauma informed coach. And I have been on this journey of healing for a really long time. I'm actually a complex trauma survivor. I have survived mental, sexual, narcissistic, and emotional abuse. I was emancipated at the age of 13 years old by the state of Massachusetts. And as I grew up, not having a lot of parental support, I have been in therapy for, say, over 35 years. I'm going on 43 years old. And throughout my time of navigating motherhood and marriage, and also working through my own complex trauma, PTSD. Yes, I am, honey. Okay. Well, tell him I can't talk right now, okay? I'm on my call. Okay. See, real life, guys. Sorry about that. So as I have gone on this healing journey myself, I have also decided that I wanted to support other women that were struggling with their own trauma backgrounds, if they had any, or when we are parents, we sometimes put ourselves last, and because we're putting our children and our families first. So we walk around kind of in this survival state all the time. And we don't really take account how we're feeling and what's going on with us because we are consumed with our children and our families. So I did that. I was the quintessential people pleaser, do everything for everyone, let me help you. And I just kind of let myself go, and I didn't take care of my inner self. So when I was on this journey, I decided that that wasn't going to be the case anymore, that I was going to take life into my own hands, and I was going to heal my trauma so I could show up in the best way possible for my children, for my husband, and for the women that I support now. So before we dive into the material, because there's definitely a lot of material here, I wanted to give you just some context around why I'm here. Really, I'm here because number one, I'm a parent. Number two, we have been faced with unprecedented times with COVID-19. And I felt right now was the most important time to step up and really share the awareness that I have. So, I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't play one on TV. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. But I do have not only a lot of life experience, but I'm also certified in somatic psychotherapy, which is, I will go into it a little bit more later, but somatic is a felt experience, which means that if we experience things on our outside world that is traumatic for us, whether it be an accident, shock trauma, loss, addiction, abuse, it doesn't even have to be that extensive. It could be like bullying, it could be relationship trauma. There's just so many different traumas that I don't go fully into here. But the point is that it's from a felt experience place. So trauma lives in our body, and it's a felt experience. It's not something that actually happens to us. It's how our body internalizes it. So if it's a felt experience when it happens, then it needs to be a felt experience when it's healed. Okay. So where I come in is, and I bring a very unique perspective to trauma. It's not your typical neurological way of looking at it or even healing it. I'm certified in that and also in NLP. And for those who are not familiar with NLP, it's neuro-linguistic programming. I'm also going to be a published author as of October. I have a book coming out called How Do I Deal with My Emotions? And this is also going to hopefully help parents and teachers and really anyone deal with their emotions, because a lot of times we suppress and we find ourselves like stuck in these pain cycles. So that is where I will leave off. Do you have any questions so far with any of that? I'm just checking on the thing. So I am going to actually try to share my screen with you for 1 second. Let me know if everyone is following me. Okay, let me get off the video.
I'm sorry, 28 chemicals.
Okay, Aaliyah, please go. Honey, I'm online here. And I'm just gonna share my screen for 1 second. Okay. Tell me if you can see the screen.
I can see your photo and a caption, I think.
Okay, can you see where?
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. I'm just gonna bring this down a little bit smaller. Oh, sorry. You should be able to. Okay, we're not going to go through all that. We are just going to go right here. Okay, so the reason why we're here today, because this is your autonomic nervous system. And this nervous system, as you can see in this slide, literally controls every system we have in our body, like our digestive system, our cardiovascular system, our immune system, everything. So when this system doesn't know how to regulate emotions, everything else is just out of whack. And that's where I was like, there is a lot of truth to this as why we are always in this survival mode. Hence why I believe that we are dealing with COVID right now. You know, everyone has a theory about it, but my theory is that we are all in this survival state. We suppress 90% of our subconscious, we are suppressing. We are not actually releasing. Anyone that has had traumatic backgrounds, they also either have been taught and conditioned to suppress. It's not okay to feel like that. You're a boy, you should be strong. Don't talk about your feelings. Those aren't accepted here. Like shame, guilt for feeling the way that we feel. And a lot of the work that I do is rewire that belief around our own emotions. So this system has, we're not going to go into this whole system because that would take days, but literally this little diagram here has a lot of lines and colors and labels. And really what I want you to focus on are the two main things. We have two main branches in our nervous system. It's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And those two, you probably are more familiar with the terms fight and flight. And then of course, freeze. And then there's a fourth, which is fawn response. So when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about something that's stored in our body. So when we have this fight or flight response, this happens automatically. Like we don't think about it. It's just a trigger. Something triggers us and then boom, we're in that response. So it's important that you have a safe space to not only, and our kids have a safe space to share their emotions and what they're experiencing and the trauma that they're feeling. You may not identify it as trauma because a lot of people think of trauma as like this big thing, like this bloody, gory scene. And yes, of course, that is a level of trauma, but there's also emotional trauma. And something we've experienced with COVID, we are mammals. We are creatures of connection, and isolation and quarantine and wearing masks and all that stuff can really trigger our fight and flight responses. And then for some of us, it can trigger the sympathetic nervous system, which is the shutdown. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, perfect. So I make sure you're following me because I know it's a lot of information. So I think it's really important that you're here for not only yourself, but because we need to learn these things too and have this awareness. And really what today is about awareness. It's just giving you this awareness to know, okay, how can I go forth with doing what I have to do for my children, for work, all the transitional things that are happening, the new normals that I'm trying to be accustomed with. What can I do to support myself? And also the acknowledgement of, have I experienced any sort of trauma? And could that be affecting how I am responding to currently what is happening in the world? So I ask you, and you don't have to share it in the chat or anything, but just to take notice of yourself and say, you know, have I experienced any trauma? It's really important that we know that, because when we experience trauma, and this could be at birth, like you could experience trauma at birth. You could have had, your mother could have had something go wrong at birth. You could have needed surgery. I know for myself, both of my shoulder bones were dislocated at birth because I was a breech. So right then and there was like a physical trauma. But not only that, I was not able to bond with my mother. So I didn't have that attunement right away. And we need that attunement with our caregivers. And if for some reason that wasn't present at the time of birth, that can cause dysregulation in our nervous system, which again is that fight, freeze response. And then there's also fawn. So this is what we're here today to talk about, is these responses. Now, you might be like, why is this important? Well, it's important for a few reasons. Number one, adrenaline. Number two, cortisol. These are natural chemicals that are released in our body when we go into any of these responses. And if there's an dose of adrenaline, that can create us to shut down or to fight. And at any one of these responses, if not regulated, if there's not this ebb and flow, and we get stuck in one of them or two of them, that becomes dangerous for our system. And that's what we call dysregulation. Now, I want you to understand that healing trauma and these automatic responses are not linear problems. This is not like a cut and dry strategy. There is a lot more to this that goes into depth and a lot deeper. And you really have to desire to want to heal at this level, because it doesn't just happen automatically. So with our children, for instance, because this is so automatic, you might recognize things in your own children, like maybe the isolation, let's just use quarantine, for example. Maybe the isolation has made them more introverted. Maybe they're more fearful, wearing the masks, being with friends, engaging in social activities, like re-engaging in social activities. Maybe you can see yourself feeling like this, like, I don't know what to do. Should I go to the party? Should I not go to the party? Should I put them in school? Should I not put them in school? There's a lot of this like fluctuation of emotions going on. And really what is underneath all of that is this dysregulation. There's not this like ebb and flow of these emotions. They're getting stuck somewhere. So what happens is we become conflicted. We become confused. We become like fearful 90% of the time. And then what that all amounts to is this like unsafe feeling. And the only way that we can heal at a somatic level is when we feel safe, right? Does that make sense? So a lot of what we're doing here is creating safety for our children. That's what I'm trying to do here. And by teaching you and bringing this awareness to you, hopefully now you can say, okay, how can I make my environment more safe? How can I communicate with my kids? How can I also support myself so I don't end up in this parasympathetic state where I'm in shock, where I'm losing connection with other people, where I feel shut down or overwhelmed or burnt out. Let me know if you have any questions so far. I'm going to stop the share for a second.
I have more of a comment. This is Bridget.
Hi, Bridget.
Or maybe something for you to comment back on. But
yeah,
a lot of what you're saying resonates with, children just day-to-day anxiety, right? So this is the same. These concepts that you're referring to, if you have someone who's chronic anxiety or intermittent but strong anxiety, you would see all these same behaviors. I don't know if it's just an observation, I guess, and maybe sort of you can see the peaks of it through an event or a series of events, like 5 days, 5 weeks into remote learning.
Yeah.
We're seeing everyone fall apart, right?
Exactly. No, exactly. And I call them symptoms of the dysregulation in the nervous system. The symptoms really become what we see, those visceral effects as well, what we feel. So what we see and what we feel. So when we take in, okay, this child is doing X, Y, and Z, and kids don't have the words, they don't have the communication skills, the emotional intelligence to express, I'm feeling such and such a way. I mean, I guess some kids do, but majority of kids really don't. So we're really looking for what we see, not so much like what we hear. And we can see a lot of pain with our children just in how they're behaving, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the challenge. Sometimes if the school folks are not as in tune with that anxiety driven behavior, it's
Yep.
easy to get labeled, or it's easy to look like the, rotten tomato in the room.
Yep.
So yeah, I certainly see the correlation between these, it's the response to the stresses, it's response to anxiety or conditions that present some form of a threat, even if it's perceived.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, for instance, like I have a daughter who has epilepsy. My 8-year-old has epilepsy, and she has had seizure episodes. And when she was in school last year, and really when this like whole nervous system started happening, and I was like using it with my clients and using it on myself, and I have a chronic illness. So for me, it was a lot in that like fight response all the time. That adrenaline was like always here, and I was totally stuck in that. And it was like not corresponding well with my digestive system. And I use this as an example because it's like when they're not speaking the same language, then there's going to be dysregulation, there's going to be disarray in our other systems because it affects literally every system we have. So with my daughter, she was having a lot of anxiety and they wanted to put her on medication. I was like, no, hold the phone. Like, not that I don't believe in medication. I believe there are times when we need medication. My son has ADHD. He has been on medication for quite a few years. But from a neurological standpoint, from like a psychologist, a therapist, their standpoint is it is a neurological thing. It's anxiety, it's stress, and really, it's really not. It's really a nervous system thing. So when I helped her manage her nervous system and the regulation in her nervous system with her fight and flight responses, she's actually much better now. And all that, and I'm going to give you some tangible things. Like I'm going to give you at least one tangible thing that you can do with your kids and yourself to start practicing this. And the whole point of this is because I believe just what you're saying, Bridget, was like, we need to bring more trauma informed awareness into the classroom and in homes because kids are not equipped at certain ages to be able to express what they exactly need. And if we're just using our senses to decide this kid is blah, 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 and labeling them, there's so much more underneath that we're not seeing. And when you go about it on a neurological standpoint, that's when people get labeled. That's when a lot of things start to counteract each other. But when you go at it with this trauma lens, it's very different because it's like we can teach our kids how to regulate. One of the biggest misconceptions, I believe, is that we are born resilient. That is BS. And it is BS because we are not born resilient. Resilience is actually something that's built up in us over time through learning how to healthily cope. That is what resilience is. What we look at as resilient in our children and ourselves is actually called grit. And what happens is when our kids are being gritty and they're just getting through it and they're just doing the thing, doing what they're told, if we're also in that state too, that is actually a nervous system response in that fight flight kind of response. We are almost desensitizing ourselves from what's going on in the external world. We're almost distracting ourselves. And this is where you see a lot of overachievers, right? When your kids are overachievers, they have to get everything right. This is when it's a red flag to be like, hold on, what's going on here? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
So a lot of what I'm trying to do is bring this awareness in because it is a mind and body thing, right? It's not just a mind thing. And if trauma lives in the nervous system, which it does, and say we are dealing with some sort of trauma, then automatically we're not processing what's going on. In an effort to kind of simplify this, it's like when we're thrown a lot of neurological scientific jargon, we're also not really processing like what is actually happening in our body. What are the language that we need to communicate for our kids to understand? We certainly couldn't go to our kids and be like, okay, honey, well, your parasympathetic nervous system and da 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 da. They'd be like, what are you talking about, right? They'd think we were crazy. But when we go at it from a lens of like, how are you processing this? Like, what are you feeling? Can you name your pain? Like, this is something I use with my clients, even as adults. Like, name your pain. Maybe it's frustration. Maybe it's anger. Maybe another thing I use with my kids, my clients, is safe words, right? So like, you just say the word and I know that you need support. So maybe it's like donut, or maybe it's like Red Sox, right? Doesn't matter what it is. They don't actually have to communicate what they're feeling, but as long as they're naming it, they're using a word to tell you, listen, things aren't good. I'm not feeling like okay. They don't need to articulate that. That's your job now to be like, okay, we got to slow this down, back up, reverse engineer what's going on here so we can figure this out. And then obviously help them. If your nervous system is out of whack and has a lot of dysregulation, your children are going to mirror that. So one of my biggest concerns and why I wanted to do this presentation today or this workshop was because if we are teachers and we are dealing with our own stress and anxiety with what's going on, and how could you not be, right? You're going to walk into the classroom carrying this stress and anxiety. And your kids already have their own stuff going on. So when there's dysregulation with the facilitator and with the students, then that's like two languages that are not like talking, they're not talking the same language. So we're not getting to what we need to do. We can't help and support each other if we're not speaking that language, that same language. So we leave a lot of room for confusion. We leave a lot of room for fear. We leave a lot more room for anxiety to build up, and then for reactions. So with the reaction part is when we're being responsive, it is automatic responsiveness. So if someone is yelling at you and you have a visceral response to that being yelled at, your body is naturally doing things to keep you safe. Like one, it could be in the fight response, or it could be shutting down, getting really quiet, preserving, becoming sleepy, or like more tired, more unaware. And then when that happens, there's less solution. There's less room for regulation and feeling better and this kind of inner peace that's supposed to happen. We're human beings, so we're supposed to be. We're not always supposed to do. But when our system is completely dysregulated, we're always doing to distract ourselves from that being. And our kids are doing the same thing, whether we see that or we don't see that. So when we experience trauma, we experience it differently than someone else. So like you could be in a car accident with someone and they can experience things completely different than the way that you're experiencing them. They might walk away from the accident totally fine. You may walk away from the accident days later feeling almost like hungover, feeling desensitized, feeling like foggy brained. Maybe you have some aches and pains. Maybe something's going on in your digestive system. Maybe you feel more panicked before you get in the car. So just because you're experiencing like a global pandemic and we're all experiencing it, doesn't mean that your body is not internalizing it the same way as, say, your husband or your kids or your neighbor. Does that make sense? Are there any questions so far?
No questions.
Okay, awesome. Everyone following me? I know it's like a lot of information to kind of plow into an hour. So
Yep.
why do our bodies experience trauma differently? The quick answer is that we are wired differently. Going back to when we're babies, early childhood days, same thing with your children. You might have 2 or 3 kids at home and you're like, why is homeschooling affecting one of them more than the other? Why does this one feel so much empowerment around this, but the other one has no confidence? There's a lot of anxiety. They're more fearful. Why is one introverted and the other one's extroverted? Like there are so many things like that we can look at and say, why are they experiencing this differently? So again, going back to when you're younger, it really depends on like how you came into the world up until about age 6. That's when the nervous system is really developing. That's when that parasympathetic branch is being developed. And if not properly, like someone like me, from the moment I came into the world, my parasympathetic nervous system was shot because of the trauma, the physical trauma. And then when I was 6 years old, I was taken away from my only caregiver I've ever known, which was my mom. So right then and there, my ability to learn changed. My ability to adapt changed. I became wired differently. What did happen though, is I learned to brace for impact a lot quicker. I learned to look for the threat a lot faster. And even when the threat wasn't there, my body was never in a place of ebb and flow. It never had this regulation because of the so many threats that I had faced at such an early childhood age. So, which we need these things, just to kind of sidebar here. We need these things in our body. Like we need the parasympathetic, we need the sympathetic to work together. We need those things because without them, we wouldn't be able to run from danger. That adrenaline wouldn't get our legs moving fast so we could run away. Or if we had a really bad accident and we were like losing a lot of blood, we wouldn't be able to shut down and freeze our system to conserve and go into that rest and restore state and heal. So early on, the nervous system, if it's not wired properly, there is no real resilience there. That's something that needs to happen in our life through our experiences and the way that we cope. And for our kids right now, some of you might think like, oh, they'll be fine, they're so resilient. What appears to be resilience is actually that grit mentality, which we all have. So it's important to kind of dial in and not only look at their own trajectory, like from birth to the age that they are now, like what have they experienced in their life that has been traumatic? What could possibly be interfering with how they are learning or the way that they are coping right now with being homeschooled or going back to school or being kind of thrown back into social situations when there's still a lot of threat in the world, right? So this is not necessarily a bad thing to happen. It's just more about awareness around it, right? So what happens for adults is, as we grow up and become adults, is we tend to kind of shut down those feelings. We suppress the emotions and we don't know how to self-soothe in a healthy way. So what happens for what I see mostly in like young teens and adolescents or going into early adulthood is that we start using other things to cope, like drugs, alcohol, self-harming, things of that nature, overachieving, because even overachieving can be very addictive for some people. So I think it's important that we recognize not only the struggles that ourselves are dealing with, but also what our children could be dealing with. What struggles are they currently dealing with? And the good news is we can heal this. We can bring back regulation in our nervous system. There are different exercises and practices that you can do to restore healthy regulation. But the first thing is more awareness around it. And what is it exactly? And that's really what I'm here today doing, is just kind of bringing this awareness.
Can I walk Tilly to the middle school so I can see Maggie and her doggy?
You have to bring Aaliyah if you go.
Why?
Ella, honey, I'm on a thing right now, okay? So I can't talk right now. Sorry, guys. I told you, real life, kids interrupting. Can you just close the door, honey? You're bringing Aaliyah. Close the door. Okay. Any questions with that? Is this resonating with you guys?
It is for me, yeah.
Who's that talking? Let me
Stacy,
see.
sorry. This is
Hi,
Stacy.
Stacy.
Hi.
Okay, hi, sorry about that. I got a message from someone that was on, and I'm not sure if they're still trying to get on or what it was. Okay. I'm glad, Stacy. Perfect. So going into this a little bit deeper, we have these survival instincts. And right now, I feel like a lot of us are using them, but we may be using them in the wrong way. And that's just, you know, for two of them is that fight and flight response, which is that arousal response. This is the way that the nervous system communicates in the sympathetic branch. We create more drama in our situations. And how we do this is we consume more stuff that we don't need. So like if there's a conversation that's happening around COVID and you're already feeling super like uneasy and on edge and not dialed in and just like, you know, all stressed out and have this anxiety, we end up consuming in these conversations or watching the news or getting on social media and scrolling and just taking in so much more. And what's happening is we're not really processing what we're taking in. We're kind of, if it's not processing, it goes straight to long-term memory. So when we don't process it and it's going right to the memory, then we start ruminating in that subconscious, which we're in 90% of the time, we're in our subconscious minds. We just begin ruminating in all these stories and all these beliefs and all these worries and fearfulness, right? So one of the main things to do, which is like a tangible thing to do, and even for your kids, is stop consuming content around the stuff that doesn't feel good to you. And like I ask my kids, like, you know, how does that feel when you read that? A simple question like that gets them thinking like, you know, oh, well, how do I feel? It's just a prompting way of being like, check in with yourself. If it doesn't feel good when you read that or when you talk about it or when you consume it, then use your own discernment and don't do that, right? Only makes sense. Because when we consume these things that are in that arousal response, that adrenaline, that hormone, it is at a very, very high point. And that is where the stress response comes in. That is that threat, the adversity. So when we are triggered, or whatever you want to call it, we get stuck in that stress response. Someone who is in fight or flight responses, they may experience things like heartbeat that quickens, short, quick breathing. It might get like faster or more dense, and your entire body can become very tense. But what's really happening is it's preparing you to take action, right? So this could be when you experience pain, maybe joint pain, maybe weakness, maybe you feel overwhelmed and you start crying. I know with my kids, I can tell just by doing this work with them and just myself, knowing this, having this awareness, like when they're in this response, when the nervous system is completely overloaded. And for some kids, they may even like pass out, or they may get so overwhelmed that they completely shut down. So it's really important that we look at these things and we start recognizing. And that's why, coming from a place of being trauma informed, I'm able to recognize these things, and why it's so important to bring this information into more schools and into more homes, because now we have this awareness so we can prevent some of these kids from shutting down and then trying to be gritty and coping. I mean, as we see right now, suicide is on a rise. Addiction is on a rise. All of these things are on a rise because we don't know how to healthy cope. We're constantly in this survival mode and this gritty mentality. So what happens is, most likely we will eventually come down, right? So we get to this very high point in the adrenaline, and then we will come down. That parasympathetic system or state eventually will shut down. Right? So for example, you may have a confrontation with someone and you are ready, you're gearing up, you're feeling defensive, you're fighting, you're arguing, you're yelling, your adrenaline is really aroused. It's like at the highest point. You might feel jumpy, you might be anxious, you might feel on guard, you might feel like that defensive feeling. But then the fight is over. Hours later, it passes. Something happens. Maybe you go for a walk, you take a ride, the two people or whoever leaves the situation. So now it's forced to kind of just slow down. And as your body is coming down, what's actually happening is, if it comes down super fast, it desensitizes, it shuts down, and it doesn't ever restore. You don't ever rest and restore. But when we have healthy regulation, we can be really stressed and slowly come down by doing some practical things. And I'm going to tell you what those things are in a minute. So it's easy to fall victim to our own nervous system responses, that fight, flight, and freeze responses, which again, I'm kind of giving you like the appetizer of all these things, but there are levels of each of them that go even deeper, and that's the work that I do. So what happens is that when we can't get back to baseline and the adrenaline is still really high, we call that like stuck in the response. So when we're stuck in the response, our body is always looking for a threat. So even when you don't realize it, you are never resting and restoring, even when you're sleeping. It's because your body is constantly on guard. It's like having guards like stand for you like 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. You're like standing there ready to fight for you. They never actually kind of just let their guard down and take a breath and walk away, because they can't. The body is always looking for a threat. And if you were an animal, this would be great, but you're not an animal, because when this happens to animals, if an animal in the wild is threatened, they also go into fight, flight, and freeze response. But once the threat goes away, if they're able to escape their threat and it goes away, they instantly go back to baseline and they're totally fine. They forget about the incident. They don't hold trauma in their bodies. As human beings, this doesn't happen. So when COVID hits, it's shock to the body. It's like shock trauma. Then we pile up all the other things, like maybe a loss of job, maybe the fear of like the homeschooling, the transitioning, the being locked in our homes, the quarantining, the wearing the masks. All these things compound each other, and it's just storing more and more trauma that's not being released. So one tangible thing that you can do, and you can bring into your home, and you can bring into your classroom, it's something that I do with my 8-year-old, so it's that simple, is I teach a technique called a scanning technique. And basically a scanning technique is when you're feeling any of those visceral responses that I talked about before, like heart quickening, denser breath, sweaty palms, nausea, feeling faint, brain fog, all these things at different levels. What you can do is you can find a moment, like everyone has like a minute or two. And you can even do this with the threat present, right? So people that have been you know, they're stuck in abusive situations, or they are in an accident, or they're getting like attacked or something, you know, dramatic is happening like that, you can do this scanning technique even in the moment to kind of bring your nervous system down slower so you're able to restore. So you're able to get clearer and grounded, and you can, because when we're clearer and grounded, when our emotions are high, our intelligence is low. But when our emotions are lower, then we can come up with solutions. We are more clearer. We can be more conscientious. We have more awareness, body awareness, especially, not so much external awareness. So with scanning, what you want to do is you want to just take a moment. You can be anywhere as long as you're not like driving and it's not endangering you of any sort, is you just stop and you scan your environment. You scan your environment and you look for something that you can focus on. When you find the object that you're going to focus on, you're going to literally stare at it for like a minute, okay? And when you're staring at this object, whatever it is, it could be your dog, it could be a pen, it could be a car, it could be anything. When you're staring at this, what's happening is you're sending a signal to your nervous system that everything is safe. Even if it isn't, even if 5 minutes later, you're still like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? For that moment, you're giving your nervous system the indication that everything is safe and that it's okay to start to come down from that adrenaline kind of rush, because that shot of adrenaline can be very dangerous and detrimental to our systems. So when we give our nervous system that chance to come down through scanning, fixating on an object, focusing in on the object, looking at the object. Sometimes I tell my kids, like, what does it look like? Think about the color, get in touch with your senses. What are you smelling? What are you feeling? Are you standing on the ground? Are you sitting down somewhere? Use your senses to really deepen the experience. And then naturally, you will start to come back down to a baseline. And at that baseline, that is where your normal functioning happens. All the systems start to normally function again. When we're here, our systems are not functioning properly. Does that make sense? Any questions? So for some of us in this fight and freeze response, what we're doing is like we're waking the system up. And we're working with the chemistry of our body. We're almost kind of like manipulating the chemistry in our body because we want it to calm down and we want this lower reactive chemicals. Because when we're in this reactive state, which a lot of us are most of the time, we're very reactive, it just automatically puts us there. And through this, and through like traditional medicine, something like an SSRI that kind of calms us down, which is like used for anxiety. I don't begrudge anyone that takes them or needs anti-anxiety medications or anything like that, but you can do the same thing to yourself in a more holistic way, in a safer way, with no side effects. And that's really kind of what I teach my kids and my clients, and I use also myself. So the real healing is when we can come from this somatic place, like I explained in the beginning, when we understand and we have the awareness around like, okay, we experience trauma through a felt way, so we can heal through a felt way. And how we do that is by feeling and dropping into our own body, feeling like, okay, what does this feel like right now? What does consuming this information feel like? What does COVID, not the actual COVID, but what does the threat of COVID feel like? Really asking ourselves these questions so we can calm that nervous system down and come back to baseline. There is only so much stress in our body we can actually tolerate. So we talked a little bit about resilience and how that's kind of a fallacy, that we're not born resilient. Resilience is kind of built over time through healthy coping, right? So, but we can bounce back quicker from things. You know, when you find yourself experiencing something that's really traumatic, and again, trauma is different for everybody, levels of trauma is different for everyone, it can take a while to bounce back from that. And that really is just our own body's way of how long it takes for someone to heal. But the problem is when we have a compounding things like compounding triggers, our body actually never heals. It actually weakens the nervous system even more. And ultimately, it makes it more harder for us to heal mind, body, and soul. So we become more ill. If you've noticed, like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like when you're really stressed out, do you get sick? Like, I know for me, if there's like a lot going on and I'm super stressed out, I have 4 kids, I run a business, I'm doing all these things, if I'm always in this survival mode, I eventually like get sick. I know my chronic illness acts up so much worse. I go into like really bad flare-ups. Also, I could just get a cold or some sort of virus. Does that happen to you? Like, do you ever feel like you get sick when you're under a lot of stress? Feel free to unmute yourselves too if you have any questions. This is kind of the time that you can ask or respond to any of this. We'll wrap up in like another couple of minutes. You can just unmute yourself if you have anything.
Yes, I always seem to get sick when I'm under stress,
Yeah,
for sure.
totally.
Yeah, I was going to agree with that. Yeah, when I've been, this is Stacy, when I've been just kind of burning the candle at both ends for too long and just have too much going on, guaranteed I'm going to get a cold or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? Because if our nervous system is attached to every other system, then when we are burnt out, our systems are down. So here we are, like, just take COVID, for example, like we're all worried about getting it and we're trying to avoid getting it. But in the avoidance of getting it, we could make ourselves sicker, right? Because we're stressed out. So
Can I just comment on something that's very, very similar? And I hope this doesn't take you into like a different land, but
no.
A lot of what you say does resonate with me. And I think if you take someone, so depending on the, you know, different people with different profiles and innate abilities will handle things, you know, differently. And one of the things I see, I've seen it with an adult that I know well, and I've seen it with a child I know well, which is, does suffer from anxiety, even sometimes depression, does have all these physical responses that, you know, are natural to them. So fight or flight, you know, a lot of fight in them. What's challenging is, particularly with a child, is people have told me forever and ever, oh, take that deep breath, do your body scan, name your emotions. Yeah, right. Like, you can't always get someone in that.
Right.
Obviously, if they're cute, they can't necessarily say, oh yeah, I'm stressed, let me go do some yoga. But
Right.
but even in a reflection over a month or 2 months, to be the type of person who says, that's not good, I'm choosing a different path, I need to find the thing that's going to work for me, and I'm going to pick this healthy choice. It takes a lot to be able to do that. And I don't know if just in your travels you say there are certain characteristics that are more likely than not, or what is it that helps an individual experiencing all that take all that advice that they may have been getting from every teacher and every parent and every neighbor of, oh, calm down, you know, count to 10 before you respond, blah, blah, you know, all these things to manage it. But at the end of the day, it's, I'm good, I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to talk about what I'm thinking, don't keep asking me how I feel about such and such. You know what I mean? It's like this denial to engage in a more healthy path. And I think that denial is probably more dominant than not, So anyway, I don't even have a particular question, but if you have a thought or comment on that, then that the segment of the population that is really not seeking counseling, seeking a different path, and how do you support them, or how do you, engage them in discussion, to advance their own thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question, but also observation as well. And I want to kind of speak to it like twofold. Number one, you mentioned a lot of the practices like, yoga and take a breath and calm down. And really that is more detrimental sometimes, because I call that surface level mindset work. And we can't just address trauma through surface level mindset work. It's just not possible. And this is where my unique approach is so different, and it's not orthodox by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to healing trauma. And I know for myself, who've sat in a therapist's office for 35 years, who did all the things, who did the breathing, did the yoga, did the meditation, did all that stuff. And I felt still very stuck in my own triggers. And I think what happens is, first of all, the hardest thing to do is engage someone with healing when they're not open and ready to do that work, because it does take work. Yes, those practices are important. And I do believe, and there is grounding in mindset things, because what's happening is we are working with our subconscious mind. But when we go from an approach of mindset work, which is, let's just say, journaling, meditation, taking a breath, calming down, you're expecting that person to be in the conscious mind. And in the moment, they're not there. They're actually in the subconscious. So a lot of what those techniques do is they bring us in from the subconscious into the present moment, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So teaching someone how to get from the subconscious to the conscious is really what the sweet spot is, but it's not done in just those moments. So it can't be just in the, I'm so stressed out, I have to take a breath right now. No, that's not when we use it. We actually practice those things when we're not in the stressful states, when we're not in fight or flight. We want to practice them every day, routinely. So like a teacher that maybe is dealing with a lot more emotions, let's just say kids that have more emotions, strong charged emotions, and you kind of know the difference. They might want to start their day off with doing some sort of exercise, maybe the scanning technique, or there are other techniques that I teach as well. I teach orientation techniques that I go into when I with my clients and all that stuff. But it's important to get them not when they're just in the stress response, because when that happens, it becomes unintentional. It's like, okay, I just need to get through this moment. I just gotta breathe. I just gotta get through. I gotta take 10. And it's like, okay, in the moment that might work, but that's called false sense of safety. We really want to make sure that these kids and ourselves are feeling internally safe all the time. And the reason why kids don't express emotion the way that we hope they did, the way that they easily would communicate it, is because they don't feel safe to. And it's not like saying that you're not making them feel safe, or you don't have a safe environment for them to share. Because I know I have 4 kids, and I'm like, oh my God, I do this for a living. Like, why won't they talk to me? Like,
I mean, it could be self-esteem, right? Self-esteem can prevent that even, I mean, that's what I see,
Totally. Yes. So all those things again are, so when we're talking about like self-esteem, just say, that's also might be a story. That might be trauma. That might be like something happened in the classroom. I'm just using this as like an example, but like say, they didn't know the answer and the teacher was like, made a comment, or maybe a kid made a comment. And now that trauma, as little as you might think it is, has now been stored in their subconscious, has stored in the nervous system. So anytime that they are feeling like, I could be judged. I could feel embarrassed. I'm
Right.
not confident enough to like know this. They're going to shut down instead of actually expressing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of like my work is I support rewiring this process because we want not to just go from this place of from subconscious to conscious. We want to have these practices in place so our nervous system literally has regulation. Because when it's going from a state of stress, dropping down into like trying to get down to a baseline, there really is no connection. So that's why healing takes time. It's not linear. It takes time and it takes practice, and practice certainly doesn't make perfect because our journeys are forever. And if you've ever been, influenced in any way, or if there's been something that happened to you or you've been conditioned, like we don't know what people in their homes are talking about. We don't know how open some parents are to discussing emotions. You could have a bad day and be like, I just want to get a cup of coffee. I don't have time to deal with like what's happening with you right now. You might think it's not a big deal to just go on your way and get your cup of coffee and do your thing. But now this child is feeling like, I don't feel seen and heard. And now they shut down. And next time something happens, they're not confident to showcase that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really different levels of comfort and safety that we need to build up in order to get someone from going from the subconscious to the conscious mind and be able to shift this in themselves quicker so they're not depressed, so they don't experience all those visceral responses as we kind of talked about. And a great psychologist, Peter Levine, I'm also a teacher of his work, and I resonate so much with it is because he explains it like we have the magic in ourselves to heal ourselves, but we don't always have the inner knowing or confidence to like do what we feel is the best thing to do for ourselves. So it's really about a combination of like learning and experiencing, but also this inner dialogue we have with ourselves. So shifting that inner dialogue makes a big deal. Like I've seen clients really shift when they are not like consumed with the story of their subconscious mind. And I also have seen them, become better with chronic illness, fear, depression, anxiety, PTSD, a lot of those things that are those visceral responses to our body because of the wiring. It's all about like sequencing the healing, unpacking the stress in the body before we receive more stress. Because listen, I would be a fool if I sat here and told you, oh, this work means that you're never going to experience stress. That's not true. You're just going to learn to regulate and restore. So when you do have stress that enters your body, you're not breaking down. You're not going into all these different responses so automatically.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Did that kind of like answer to your question a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really, the root of my question is about how do you get that individual, whether they're 55 or 14, to engage in that self-help, any self-help approach, which yours sounds, like an interesting one, because I mean, it's sort of what I know is needed. You
Sure.
prepare yourself for those stressful moments so that you're not constantly in fight.
Yep.
And here they may be individuals like don't even know they're in fight. Like, what are you talking about? This is the way I am. It's my personality.
Yep.
So and it's, yeah, I mean, that's exactly, it's really probably why I was drawn to the content, because I believe in these physical things in the brain, and I see it happening, and I see the patterns, and I see the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you can't work with them when acute, but then interestingly enough, yeah, I have a child who COVID has been great for because the stress has gone away. He has social
me
stress.
too.
He's stressed competing in work. And so
Yeah.
he's an introvert. He's read 220 books. He's having a
Wow,
great time.
geez. Whew.
So he's, you know, feeling good. And I'm thinking, okay, here you go, back to school.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that's no wonder they were, you know, acute, literally always living in the red state.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
that's where he lives, unless you completely like basically put a bubble around him, and then the red state's gone. That's interesting.
Yeah,
You know, and now I'm saying, okay, so I'm about to go back to the red state. What do I do?
exactly.
And, you know, it's not someone who's saying, oh, I need help. I need to advocate for myself. I need to go talk to 2 teachers and tell them how I feel. That's not who we have.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
we have, and anyway, so that's the perspective that I'm listening to you from, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And with my daughter too, COVID's been wonderful. The one that has the epilepsy, she was so stressed at school. One of her teachers was just, it wasn't a great match for her, you know. And since she's been out, she's not only the work that we're doing together with the nervous system stuff, but also just the fact that she's away from the environment. So
Right.
here's the other thing. There are environmental factors that we cannot control. So going back to school might be a trigger. So teaching them to start regulation now, doing these techniques now, the practices before we get into the red state, that's really, really important. And that's
Right.
just like a buildup. It's almost like going to the gym and building that muscle. So when you're running the marathon, you're prepared for what your body is about to endure. It's really
Do you
the
have
same.
a list of these techniques? Is it, I've been hearing little bits in here. I don't know if it's coming up or if you have a,
So what I
conceptually, I follow what you're saying.
Yeah, so the techniques and the practices and the exercises that I do is I do have like an extension program, which is a $44 program. And you literally take it for 21 days and you go through all the different practices and the exercises. And they're mini videos for like 5-6 minutes. There's one longer video. I think the longest is like 11 minutes because I take you through like a healing kind of meditative thing. But otherwise, that's really where I package all of my tools in that. And then I also have a membership, which every month we have an expert that comes on that teaches about trauma informed. So we come on and we talk about trauma information and just how to make your home more trauma informed, how to help your students become more trauma informed, bringing that kind of awareness into the classroom. But it's done by not just me. There are other trainers and professionals and trauma experts that come in and talk. And every month we have a different one. So like last month was Trauma 101. This month is root cause. And we literally go through the different lenses and all the different tools and techniques to help yourself and whoever.
Okay.
So I do have extensions to that. This was really just coming from a place of like, let's bring some awareness. Because a lot of people don't know about the nervous system work and they know about traditional talk therapy, but they also know that it's not always effective. And that's not saying that therapy is bad, because I account a lot of who I am today because of good therapy, but at the same time, there is a level here, a deeper level that like what you're explaining now, you know, in the moment when we're intentional, like when we go to therapy and we're intentional about, okay, I'm going to therapy because I have to talk about my problems. Well, then it becomes like a shift of like, okay, I have to do this. But we really want to get to a place where we want to create this regulation in our systems so we can feel better, you know? And it's not really about advocacy, more or less, that it's about, because it's so automatic, because like exactly what you said, someone may not know they're in these states. So it's really getting our body so equipped to just shift out of the state as soon as it gets there. Now, again, if you have to be in a fight or flight state because of an actual threat, great. You want that. You want your body to do what it's supposed to do. But if there's no threat, and your body's still in that state, that's when it becomes more dangerous. And that's when you see a lot more of those visceral things that we talked about. And then the long-term stuff, which is PTSD, depression, anxiety, chronic illness, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
know my approach is it's unorthodox for some, but truthfully, it works. It works because we are not just going from this, I intentionally have to do this at this time. It's more of like a long-term building process, just like I said, going to the gym. And there's certain exercises and techniques and tools that you can take into that, which I do teach in a different extension of this. And I'm happy to drop a link for you if you want to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was intrigued with the content. I my son was diagnosed with anxiety at age 6. So, I've been on this path for a very long time, and always looking for just resources, knowing his profile is, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
Well,
the good thing is, that's what we call suppression, and sometimes they don't know if they're good or not good. There's a lot of like, I think I'm good, but I always ask, well, what are you feeling? How does that make you feel? How does that make you feel when someone says that, or when you read that, or when COVID hit, how did that make you feel? And that just kind of draws them to kind of respond in a different way, and also to start thinking about it. I think awareness is keys to everything. The more awareness that you can bring to your kid, no matter what age and grade they are, I think that's important. Even if you're like, okay, I may not be able to take them out of this state, because again, if your child has anxiety, let's go way back, draw a timeline. When did it start? When did it become present? Was there something traumatic in their life? Was there something at birth? I mean, have you dealt with anxiety yourself? Because again, kids are sponges to our own energy. So I had to look at that. I know with my 4 children, like my daughter that deals with anxiety as well. Before I did this work, I was a very responsive person, meaning like I was in that fight or flight all the time. I was continually just responding to life instead of just checking in with how I was feeling and then dropping down and knowing my body and knowing how to regulate my nervous system. It was always this very like adrenaline responsive way, yelling, arguing, just going off emotions, just completely emotionally charged.
Yeah.
And they pick up on that anxiety as well. So it doesn't mean it's like a judgment thing. It's just saying like, where are you? Like really, where are you in your home? What is it like? What's the dynamic, the environment, the atmosphere? And then obviously creating safety in the places that we can't. So part of why I wanted to do this was because safety is really important, and we can create safety in our classrooms. We can create safety at home where they can feel more internally safe to check in, to, again, if you want to say advocate, you can say advocate, but also use their own senses to decide, what does this feel like for me?
Right. Well, this has been very helpful. I appreciate your time.
No problem.
Yeah, interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, it is. And I've made it like a life's mission to, create more awareness around this. Like I said, I have a book coming out in October that will hopefully go even a level deeper to help parents and teachers and whatever understand how important this is, that it's just not about coping, right? Because we're a culture of coping. We're just so quick to just get through it and cope. But really it's building up that resiliency. And again, that's just like building up anything. It takes time and the right resources to do that. Right. So I did drop a link into the 21-day nervous system reboot, which again is more my tools and practices And you can take it at your own time. It's not something that you have to take live. So you can do it at your own time. You could take the tools and practices and bring it to your child that deals with anxiety. You can start teaching them these techniques without it even being like, I'm teaching you something. It can be a fun thing, an experimental thing. And yeah, so I just dropped that in there if you were interested in
Okay.
that. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yep. I see it. I was able
Yeah.
to, okay. So I'll look into that. I'll check that out for sure.
Yeah, it's just an extension. It's just a level deeper that
Yep.
you can do.
Great.
And yeah, so that's basically, there are so many different things, and this goes like, I could never put everything into one into one workshop. I may do an extension onto this where I have a lot more like practices and things like that. But for now, I felt like, just because it can be overwhelming, this information is a lot. And I want to give you time to also process it. But just the awareness around, like, we do things to cope and survive, and so do our kids. So if we're doing something to cope, look at if it's healthy, if it's not healthy, like common sense, and how is this working with us or against us in our own systems? And are we creating more space to heal? And a lot of what I do in the link that I dropped is we do a practice called creating more space. So it's creating more capacity. And that's really what the nervous system needs to start to build up healthy regulation, is creating capacity. And I use the term like beach balls in a pool. If there are all these beach balls in a pool, then it doesn't have much room to move around. But once we take some of those beach balls out, we create more capacity. So that means that things aren't building upon building. Like, you're upset, you have anxiety, something goes wrong, you get cut off in traffic, the line at Starbucks is too long, and then the teacher calls and it's like snap, and then we're all in like this responsive mode. And then the next step is, how do we cope? And usually it's unhealthy coping. It's like, have a glass of wine, take a pill, I need to sleep, all these things. So really, before we get to that place, it's conditioning the body to deactivate the stress before we even get to that place.
Right.
So that was really just the run of it today.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Good luck to you as you
Thanks, Bridget.
continue your journey.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. I honor you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a nice session. I appreciate you sort of publicizing it. So
yeah, well, I figured, why not, right? If it can help, hopefully it can help, then why not talk about it? It's just something that we're not quick to talk about, I guess.
Right. No,
So,
it is. It's a huge issue for sure.
and we're all dealing with it. That's the thing. Like, we can deny it, but on some level, we're all dealing with some sort of trauma from this. And my fear is the aftermath. If we don't nip it now, if we don't start creating those safe spaces and creating more capacity for more stress, and if we don't stop consuming what doesn't feel good, then eventually there is going to be a huge aftermath. And, I want to see if I'm in a space that can support and help, then why not just kind of curb that? Especially for our kids.
I mean, it is a good point. And just viewing it from a little different background than you, it doesn't take a huge trauma event. I mean, my son had this, and maybe it was from birth, in the hospital. I remember he had an episode, and when he was 3 months, we thought he was getting stuck by pins because he was screaming. He was like that from childhood. And anyway, you can have it's part of you, so it's really is interesting.
Absolutely.
But I'm gonna run.
One thing that if you could take away one thing from this, is that trauma is not what happens to us, although that is what the common belief is. Trauma is just how we internalize it. So if what happened to him at the hospital, you might not have looked at it as trauma. Maybe in hindsight, now you might, but before you might not have. Just like when your kid falls off the bike.
It's how his nervous system replies to it.
Right, exactly. It's how you internalize it and how your nervous system learns to regulate. And if there's any interruption in that processing, if there's any, even I try to explain to teachers, if a child has something going on and you respond to it like with aggression or yelling, or you look down and you're not creating a safe space for them, that can actually be traumatic into their system and interrupt the wiring. And
Yeah.
then from there on, that's how it is. There is no here's the thing, there is no turning back. We can only go
Mhm.
from here. We can't like take back what happened or redo those things.
Mhm.
So it's important. That's why I think it's important to say, okay, like, where did this start? And I know with my daughter, she didn't remember her seizures. Like, I'm like, how could this have been trauma if she didn't remember them? Like, she was unconscious. And
Yeah.
when I was going through this process, it's like she heard stories. She woke up in a hospital. She had to go for tests. All those things added up. So the
Mhm.
trauma for her wasn't actually what she experienced. It's how her body internalized what she was experiencing.
I see.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you again for the workshop. I appreciate your time and wish you
so
a lot of luck.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Bridget. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.